Hey everyone, and welcome to everyone also joining us live over the recording. I'm Mairead Cahill. I'm the founder of Wonderoom. We work on nature strategies, partnerships, and immersive learning to help people and business grow better with nature. And the reason we produced Sea Land City is very much around this idea of, as a broader initiative, really, and project to connect people and business to nature, positive solutions and stories here in the UK. And as you heard in the film, but for those joining now, the reason that's so important, and I feel so passionately about it, is because we are in fact one of the most nature depleted countries in the world still, and one of the most nature disconnected. So with that in mind, the challenge and invitation for all of us today, for the panel and for the discussion afterwards, is really how can we work together as people and business to grow UK nature restoration for our collective well-being. And so joining us today, I'm very thrilled to have such an incredible panel, and thank you so much for coming today. We have Will Kirkpatrick from the Crown Estate, who is a senior advisor across climate, nature, and social strategies and engagement. And the Crown Estate, of course, manages a number of land and assets across our cities, land, and seabed, and so is, and that really for the benefit of the nation. And so really interesting to hear your perspective also. And then we have Claire Trenor, who is Chief Commercial Officer at Nattergal, which is a leading UK nature restoration business across 3 sites currently and to about 2,500 acres of land. And then we have Whitney Thomas, who is Head of Corporate Finance at Triodos Bank UK, who really have pioneered so much in terms of investments in nature, but also climate and social impact more broadly as well. So thank you all so much for being here today. We're going to jump into some questions. We're going to keep the panel lively, and then we are going to move to audience really for you, because this should be very much an interactive session, and we look forward to your questions, so get them ready for sure. Starting with Will, what prompted your and the Crown Estate's involvement in the Sea Land and City initiative as a lead partner and sponsor, and how does it connect to your approach to nature recovery?
Thanks, Brad. I think it was about 2 years ago that we first met, and first of all, congratulations on the film. It's so positive, energetic, and enthusiastic. There's lots of enthusiasm around it, and I think when I first met Mairead, that really came across, that vision, something distinctive and inspiring, and we need better stories. So it was sort of easy to get behind the vision that Mairead was painting, and obviously the team have done a fantastic job on that. I think the other thing to say is the clue is in the title, Sea, Land and City. There's very low awareness of the Crown Estate, very low understanding. We tend to be sort of behind, below the radar a little bit. It can be confused for Crown Prosecution Services, the duchies, all sorts of different things. And it is an extremely sort of diverse portfolio that we have, as Mairead touched on it. Built an urban environment in London, regional portfolio, rural, coastal, 50% of the coastline around England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and responsible for managing the seabed across England, Wales, and Northern Ireland as well. That's 12 nautical miles. So covers such a big range of topics, and we definitely are not in the business of advertising ourselves. All of the money we generate goes to the Treasury. So we need to, if we want to spend money on activity, we want to spend it on impact-led projects like this. So very pleased to support it. It came at a time when we were developing our nature recovery ambition. And I think we were really realizing that it was such a big challenge. There were sort of big picture challenges around systems, the economy, links to climate, but it was also very local and, you know, crosses ecosystems, across communities, supply chains. So I think the film and the vision for the film to look at those solutions and how they cross over between people, communities, and local environments was something we really bought into.
Amazing, thanks, Will. And I guess straight over to you, Whitney. This is quite a fire round style panel questioning. As a real pioneer in terms of investing in nature, what do you really think could unlock a lot more money and investment for nature projects here in the UK? Because we really do need to grow and scale that up. And what do you actually look for as an institutional investor?
Yeah, well, thanks very much for having me. So this is a topic of conversation that comes up a lot. Government money, our money, taxpayers' money is obviously finite. So given the gap, the nature gap that we have, that does need to be filled by private finance. And for that to happen, really at scale, because a lot of the projects that were in the film were actually quite small, and we need to be doing more of this, much bigger in size. We really need three things for institutional investors to be investing in nature. One is a stable policy environment. So that's really important for investor confidence. Different flavors of government have actually done some really good stuff in terms of, trying to encourage nature restoration. But what we need is for the policy to be predictable and stable. So that's one aspect. We need robust demand. So what I mean by that is that some of the projects that we saw, for example, oxygen conservation, they're trying to generate revenues associated with the carbon sequestration from the temperate rainforest that we have here in the UK. But we need to be encouraging corporates to be wanting to invest and buy those revenues. So it's really important that we have robust demand. And then we need price certainty. And that's a role that government can play, not necessarily by always providing subsidies, but sometimes by just providing a floor price. And these are the three aspects that were present for the last 25 years and has meant that in the UK, we went from 30 years ago producing maybe 2-3% of our energy from renewables to last year producing over 50%. So if we can create some of those similar conditions that we were successful in creating to really drive that growth in renewables, if we can do something similar for nature, I think we stand a really good chance of being able to address this nature gap that we have.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much. And I guess building on, I think it was the second of your 2 points around demand side, Claire, turning to you as a leading nature restoration business, doing a lot of the work that we have seen in the film just now, how do you make nature restoration work commercially in this very new market?
So essentially, to make it work commercially, there's two things you need, right? You need a product to sell, and I think your documentary very well covers all the values that nature actually delivers that are not currently being valued by society. So it's everything from biodiversity to carbon to water to natural flood management. So that's all there. I think then you need to actually stimulate the market, to stimulate demand, to Whitney's point. And there's probably three things that we are focused at NASCAL in order to do that. And the first one is collaboration. If you are starting a market or trying to stimulate a brand new market, you can't do it alone. We need to collaborate with multiple stakeholders across the whole value chain of the industry. So whether that's investors, whether that's data and science, whether that's our competitors at times, it takes an army really to get this going in terms of advocacy and policy and everything else that needs to happen to really stimulate the whole market itself. The second thing you really need is integrity. And I think nature is a new market. People need to be able to trust it and to be able to feel confidence that it is robust and real. We do take a lot of learnings from the carbon market and its failings there. And so from that point of view, we're really making sure that we're clear and not overvaluing what we're actually providing and delivering, but also engaging with local communities and really making sure we're embedding them in the work that we're doing as well. And then thirdly, which you're very much helping us with, Mairead, is storytelling, right? People need to understand what this is and why this is so important. And I think nature is very emotive, right? You show it so well in the film. People really feel emotional about it in a way that they don't for carbon. Carbon doesn't have that emotive element for people. But I think what we need to do better is to really communicate actually the values that nature bring, and that is the economic values that it brings for in terms of products and services, but also in terms of things like just keeping us out of hospitals, the amount of hospitalizations linked to either mental health or air pollution or a range of other things that actually nature can help us solve. And so through collaboration with across the whole industry, we need to be able to tell more stories so that people really feel this, and that's what's going to stimulate the demand and hopefully get the government moving on consistent policy and price certainty.
Amazing, thank you. And Will, can you share a couple of just very practical examples of how the Crown Estate is leading nature recovery on, well, land and sea, actually?
Yeah, there are a lot of examples, obviously much more to do. In the film, you spotlighted Studland Bay. We've got 30 projects like that in the marine environment where nature is a core part of that project work. But probably one that I'd pick up on is environment farm-based tenancies. So we know that it's a real challenge for farmers to switch to regenerative farming practices at the moment, and that's due to a number of factors. There are systematic challenges around that. We lease the land to farmers, and typically farmers will have a 5-year lease on land, and that really disincentivizes them from trying new things, and also doesn't really give sufficient time to yield results. So what we've done is we've developed these environmental farm-based tenancies. They're 15 years in length. They have a range of different sort of goals that are at a local farm, developed at a local farm-based level as well. And they've been successful in terms of their uptake so far. We've got 15,000 acres of our 75,000 acre rural estate are currently under management of the farm business tenancies. And so that's something we've developed in partnership with farmers and with the Tenant Farmers Association as well. So I think partnership is absolutely key, and that's one we'll keep to invest in. Yeah.
Love it, thank you. And Whitney, over to you, because we obviously know that there can be a bit of a challenge around the investment case or business model sometimes in those early stages of investing in these really important projects. So I'm curious, how have you managed to get very creative on the financing side to allow some of these projects to thrive and grow?
So I guess the first thing to say, and to hopefully put people's mind at ease, is, you know, this isn't what we're talking about here. We're not trying to monetize nature, you know, and I think that sometimes, like, people just feel like that's a little bit uncomfortable, this idea that, you know, we should value nature for what it, you know, gives us intrinsically, which is the infrastructure, you know, that we need. However, you know, where there are opportunities to generate some revenue streams that are associated with generating nature positive outcomes, that is really useful, because then it means that organizations like Naturgal, for example, or Oxygen Conservation, one of our customers that we saw in the film, are able to borrow money from people like us in order to be able to invest in those nature interventions. Now, what does that actually mean? So for Oxygen, for example, that means developing carbon sequestration on their estates up in Scotland, and that might come from re-wetting peat, for example, so that it actually holds the carbon as opposed to emitting it. And finding buyers who will be willing to pay for that outcome. And then on that basis, we're able to lend money. Now, we have had to be creative because nature is not linear. You know, nature doesn't fit into spreadsheets. So you do have to think quite, you know, creatively about how can we structure a loan where, you know, we need to protect our depositors' funds and make sure we're going to get that money back, but we also know that we need to be patient. And so just 2 examples of how we do that. One is to have as long a period as we can that's what we call interest only, so there's no capital repayments that come back, to enable the organization to, you know, plant trees, re-wet peat, do whatever it is that they're doing. And then the second thing we've done is not have some nice linear amortization over 30 years, because that's never going to work, but is actually agreeing with the organization a split of when they are successful and generating revenues through the sale of carbon credits, for example, or the sale of biodiversity net gain units. A certain percentage will go to pay down the loan, and then a certain percentage will go for reinvestment in the project or the organization. So those are just two ways that we're thinking about, how can we flex and find different ways, so that we can make this a success.
Amazing. And I guess building on that, from your side, Claire, as a nature restoration project, where are you seeing most interest right now? I'm really curious. And for what? And by whom?
So obviously there's a statutory market. For those who don't know, there's a statutory market in the development sector whereby developers are required to not only compensate for the biodiversity loss that they're causing through development, but also to compensate essentially for historical loss of an extra 10%. So that's a very important market at the moment, because there is a decent level of certainty and demand and price security. I think apart from that, we haven't really seen any clear shape of industry or organization that's coming to us in terms of demand. I think what we are seeing is, though, those who have kind of organizations with purpose, who are keen to either mitigate their impact or manage their impact in terms of biodiversity and nature, who are looking for higher integrity carbon credits, so potentially looking to purchase from natural UK-based carbon credits rather than abroad. They are coming to us. And what we are finding is that they tend to be more private organizations who don't have the same barriers and hurdles to overcome as public organizations with shareholders and a lot more stakeholders to manage in terms of investment. But we are looking for early adopters, so I put that out to the audience if anyone would like to speak to us.
Amazing. And I guess turning a little bit to the community side now, I guess, as we heard in the film, there is a real challenge around equality of access and who's really at the table and who benefits. And so with that in mind, in terms of driving greater community inclusion, Will, any thoughts and comments and reflections from what you're doing at the Crown Estate?
Yeah, I think the film captures the challenge really well, and obviously we want as many people to benefit from nature as possible. Clearly there are lots of socio-demographic, regional disparities and reasons why not everybody is benefiting from nature. The Crown Estate has a mandate from government to deliver social value. So, we have to deliver social value. We have to deliver on a commitment to bring sustainable development to the UK, which includes supporting communities. So that's why it's one of our 3 priorities in our nature recovery ambition. We have 3 goals. One is about biodiversity, the other is about water, and the third is about people and nature. So we are working on our approach to that. And the first thing we need to do is to develop our baseline to really understand who is accessing nature and how can we, across our whole portfolio, do more. But we are doing quite a lot of things at the moment. So I can tell you about a few of those. So one thing is offering schools visits across our rural portfolio to farms. So we've got 40 school visits with, in partnership with the Country Trust. We're going to be offering visits to 1,000 school children by the end of the year, coming from areas of social and economic disadvantage. With Regent Street and our other holdings, these are really big tourist destinations. So Regent Street and the West End attracts 50 million visitors a year. Windsor Great Park, 5 million. And then another site called Rushton Lakes, which is a big retail park and country park. So these are huge platforms and opportunities to engage and educate public in nature. So at Rushton Lakes, we've worked with Wildlife Trust to reintroduce beavers, and that's sort of part of the visitor experience now. In Regent Street, we're working with Westminster Council to try to realise John Nash's 200-year-old vision to create a permanent green corridor between the royal parks so that everybody who visits can experience nature. and obviously the other benefits that come with that in terms of climate resilience. What else are we doing? I'm sure we're doing a few others. Yeah, we've been working on coastal restoration of pathways as well to help people enjoy nature there in a safe way. Amazing. So yeah, there are a few things, but I definitely recognise that we need to do more, and we're working on that.
Amazing. I'm conscious of time because I do want us to get to audience Q&A and discussion. So I thought we could do a round where basically I invite you to share 2 things that you would love to see more of and will be helping to do more of in the next 12 months to drive nature restoration. So Claire, should we start with you and then Whitney?
I think 2 things that are critically important and that we at Nattergal are really trying to increase our focus on, and the first, as Whitney's touched on as well, is policy. So we need policy certainty, we need more supportive policy to stimulate the market, and we're really stepping up our advocacy with a lot of other partners to try and get that message through to the government. And then the second one is storytelling, and that's through data and science, that's through people coming and visiting our sites, it's through really making sure that the full economic benefits that nature brings are understood and valued.
Brilliant, thank you.
You would have thought we compared notes. I'm really sorry, this is going to be a bit boring, but yes, I think in terms of what we need to do at scale, the most important thing is the stable policy environment that we desperately need. But I think the other one to build on, you were talking about storytelling, is we've got to bring people with us. I mean, you know, it's exactly like, you know, there's almost no point having that hard data unless you can really bring people with you. And so we've got to find a way to link this to the stuff that people really care about. People are really annoyed that the rivers are so polluted and there's so much sewage that's there. So we need to be able to recreate those same examples to really get people engaged with this, to demand that we, corporates, government, are protecting and restoring nature, because we absolutely all depend on it.
Thank you. Will?
Something that I'm really interested in is how we can build more stories about the opportunities from nature. So with the switch to regenerative farming, how can we win the case that it's not an additional cost and effort to farmers, but how can we have more examples of how that yields greater revenue and profit for farmers, and how they can diversify their activities? How can we have more examples about how more nature in urban environments makes local high streets more attractive, increases visitor numbers, increases business in the area? So I want more examples of, you know, how we move from in the business case for nature as a risk mitigation opportunity, as a general opportunity for people's well-being, and for the economy as a whole. That was one thing. I had 2 things or one thing?
Yeah, please go ahead.
The other is partnerships, and you know, for us, nature doesn't stop and start at the edge of our boundaries, and so we must work together. And I think there are a number of amazing pilots that I'm seeing from various organisations across the UK, but I think to really make a meaningful impact, you need to think about major partnerships that really deliver at scale.
Love that. I think I'll add 1 or 2 from, I guess, my side and the Wonderoom side, which I think, to build on what you've all shared, which I fully agree with. I really feel that there's this massive education gap. And one thing that I'm very committed to and that we'll be doing is actually immersive learning journeys for people in businesses to, you know, learn about the real opportunity that nature presents and how they, as a distinct and unique business, can work with nature in ways that are right for them. And so sort of grow with nature, you know, and to actually get out there and experience some of these incredible sites. So we'll be through an immersive learning journey doing that sort of education digitally and taking people out into the field so they can experience it close up in so many of these amazing projects. So we're really excited to be doing that, because at the end of the day, this has to be about including so many more of us. And I was embarrassed actually that I didn't know until I returned to the UK, even working in the space that we were so nature depleted and disconnected. It hadn't quite landed on me. And I actually felt quite disconnected, actually. I was like, I don't actually know what's going on in our countryside or our oceans or our coastlines. And that really sparked my interest and passion. But, you know, it can't just be about one or a few of us going on an adventure. It has to be about all of us coming together to go on this adventure together, because we can only solve it together, and it has to include more of us. And so that's something I'm deeply passionate about, alongside, of course, finding and connecting into these more positive stories, because I think this narrative around, it's not just a narrative, it's a fundamental truth that, like, our health, we are nature, so our health is totally dependent on nature. And also, nature's health is what underpins our whole economy and climate, and therefore the health of our communities. And I think that story needs to be shared, and how we get behind that needs to be shared a lot more. I think also the team is kindly sharing our slide at the back. So for the immersive learning journeys, if you are interested, there is, and apologies for those on the call, on the line, you won't be able to see this, but there is a QR code. You can also contact us. Email address is there if you're curious to learn more. We'd be delighted to chat. Now over to Q&A. Oh, lots of questions. Fantastic. So Asha, yes.
Thank you. What a privilege to be first up. Thanks very much, guys, for talking us through that. I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to case studies of nature-based solutions, and not to pick on one in particular, but I was particularly inspired. There was a case study in the Wyre Valley which Triodos led on from a financing perspective, and there were a couple of the panel talked about revenue streams, and particularly focused on carbon and biodiversity credits as a revenue stream. But what wasn't mentioned, which I wanted to hear more about, is the kind of insurance type market, and particularly kind of when local businesses are close to nature and might benefit from things like flood management, you know, how they might be a potential revenue stream. And then my other question is to do with the investment side. So you talked about companies putting money into this, but in terms of private investors and patient capital, can you talk a little bit about that side of it, and who might be the private investors, what sort of return they might expect? They're probably questions for both Whitney and maybe Claire.
Well, I'll start. So yes, so the Wyre Catchment project is one that I worked on, and my role in that was actually raising the investment. So you've come to the right place with that question. So for people who don't know, the idea around natural flood management is, you know, instead of putting what you call kind of grey measures in, so concrete to hold back floodwaters, you do a lot of work at the upper level of a catchment area to avoid the water going downstream and potentially flooding properties and assets. So, you know, it might be things as simple as very technical terms like re-wiggling a river. So instead of the river being, you know, straight, just letting it take its natural course, planting trees, putting in leaky dams, getting beavers to work, etc. And all of that in order to avoid, when you do have a 1 in 50 year catastrophic rain event, just much less of the water goes downstream. So absolutely, NFM, natural flood management, really important here in this country. I know there's a project that the Conduit are backing, you know, looking at how we can really scale this up. The challenge, and you've hit the nail on the head, is who actually wants to pay for that outcome? And the particular challenge with natural flood management is that it tends to benefit a very wide group of people. And whenever something benefits a very wide and disparate group of people, it's very difficult to get an individual company or an individual statutory body to stand up and say, I'm going to pay for those natural flood management interventions because it's good for everyone. And so the biggest challenge, I think, with NFM and scaling it up is that stakeholder management work and bringing people together. And sort of the single thing that made that project finally come together is when the 5 entities, there was Flood Re, there was the Environment Agency, et cetera, the United Utilities, when they finally realized none of them could make a business case on their own to their directors and to their shareholders. So basically, we had to convince them to just kind of like all hold hands and jump into the deep end of the pool together and just go, we're just all going to do it because we know that collectively this makes sense, but we have to be able, to do it that way. So that will be the case for a lot of these nature-based projects. And I'm happy to talk more about it later. Just quickly on the investor side, and then I'll let Claire touch on this as well. For a lot of these projects that are unproven, so for example, there wasn't the science to really back up what was going to happen with that project. We needed high net worth individuals and charitable trusts and foundations to stump up the money. Because none of the banks would do it, none of the institutional investors, the insurance companies, the pension funds, because there just wasn't enough evidence. And so that's really what we need to kind of bridge from where we are today to where we're trying to get to in terms of really getting that institutional scale money, is we need first mover money, and that does tend to be from individuals and foundations.
I think you covered a lot of the key points there, but I think you hit the nail on the head. The key challenge is how do we get people to actually pay for the value that they're receiving through natural flood management. I think the initiative that the Conduit has launched, which is Reflood, has a lot of the right people at the table. So you've got the insurers like Aviva and Allianz involved. I think the Crown Estate are involved, and a series of other landowners, National, are involved in terms of helping with the commercialization level. I think we need to get creative, and I think that's part of a new market. I think one of the things I toy with is, in terms of health insurance, if you're a smoker, you pay a premium for that. Is there something similar that we could develop from an insurance perspective in terms of if you're living in a specific flood area that would help fund these things? But there's a lot of work to do. Great, good.
EIS, SEIS, but for investment in this sort of thing, if there was something similar, government's a bit short of cash, but that sort of thing, where there would be advantages of, I've not heard that idea before, I've just come out with that now, so but.
Thank you.
No,
Next questions?
Hello, I'm Daniel Hudson. I'm from Wakelands Agroforestry, and I've got a question for you, Will. It was really exciting to hear you talk about the, how there's not really a conflict necessarily between agriculture or ecological agriculture and nature recovery. And of course, we need to be thinking big. That's what everyone's saying. We need to be thinking big, and Crown Estate, of course, is in a unique position to think big and act big. It's quite exciting to think about, the potential volume of trees that could be planted if the Crown Estate's agricultural land was converted to agroforestry, for example. And of course, like with the new subsidies environment, it looks like the SFI is moving us in the right direction. Of course, so it looks like your tenant farmers, for example, could get paid £850 per hectare for high density agroforestry. And if the whole Crown Estate was doing high density agroforestry, we're talking about planting 50 million trees. Right? That's something that could be extremely beneficial for a huge number of different reasons. Obviously, if it's designed in the correct way, you shouldn't be monoculture agroforestry planting. But that looks extremely exciting. It's something at scale, and because the subsidy environment is right, it looks like that could be commercially viable for your tenant farmers. So I'm just wondering what your thinking is around that, and how the Crown Estate thinks about guiding its tenant farmers into more ecological ways of farming.
Yeah, thanks for that question. And as part of the environment farm-based tenancies, we're trying to support farmers with all sorts of different aspects of regenerative farming, environmental practices, soil quality, etc. But we have made a significant investment this year. So we've got a 20 million environment fund for farmers, and a lot of that has gone into tree and hedgerow planting. So planted 200 miles of hedgerow and 700 acres of forestry up to date. So we haven't spent all of that money, but that money is available to farmers to increase tree cover effectively. I could probably follow up with you afterwards because I'll have to put my hands up and say I'm not the expert on woodland, but it's a good question, and I think we're hopefully going in the right direction.
Thanks.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, let's catch up. That'd be good.
Any other questions? Lady over there and here.
Thank you to the panel for a great discussion. So I'm Neha Datt, I'm the UK government lead on the TNFD, and I have a question for Will and then one for Whitney. So Will, it's more a request actually. You know, you mentioned 2 points that really kind of summarized the points that I was going to make on opportunities and on partnerships. And one thing that we're trying to do within the TNFD and the UK government's influence over the TNFD is to reframe the whole narrative towards a growth framing. You know, because that's music to everyone's ears, and it is in fact reflective of the reality as well, that nature both underpins the economic growth as well as drives it. And on the partnerships point, you know, I was wondering if you could, as one of the more forward-leaning landowners, influence other landowners. So we've set up something called the National Estates for Nature Group, which is, you're nodding, so you're familiar with it. There are quite a few, landowners in there, without taking names, who aren't really sort of sparking at the opportunity angle here. You know, it's more around, I think that they're still a bit skeptical about what's in it for them. You know, if they do like a nature baselining or like a, TNFD LEAP integration. And we held like a peer-to-peer, conversation last week, and it was fantastic because 2 people from Crown Estate actually managed to convince one of the skeptics, that the benefits of doing TNFD reporting, for example, is that you're able to demonstrate to, the community the benefits of the steps you're taking as a landowner, to demonstrate your stewardship of the land. So it's more a request for you to really sort of expand the partnerships angle because it's a win-win for everyone. On the point of opportunities, this is more for the entire panel. The TNFD are building an international case study library to really collate positive stories of how nature is driving or unlocking revenue growth opportunities, new market, new product opportunities. So if there's anything that you feel you could input to that, please do follow up with me. And we're really keen to build that out. So I'll let you respond and then I'll go to Whitney.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I'm sure you've met my colleague Trent, who is leading the charge on all things TNFD. And having had a background in other businesses like O2, where I did sustainability for a good 5 years, I was really pleased that our CEO, Dan Labad, was at the DEFRA event during London Climate Action Week, and he was speaking to all of the TNFD pilots that we're doing. So for me, having a CEO who's confident enough to speak to that level of technicality is a positive sign. We're really leaning into the framework and looking at a number of pilots to really explore the impacts and dependencies and the risks and opportunities for nature recovery. And one of the projects that I really like is a coastal project where we're looking at when you can bring in aggregates from dredging and use that as part of coastal restoration, so salt marsh restoration, but also coastal restoration for beaches, which has a benefit to people and the local economy as well. So a few examples like that, and yeah, happy to do what we can to champion the framework. It's a positive thing.
Thank you so much. I know we haven't got time for too many more questions. I'm being given the signal, so if we can get a couple more in, or that would be great. If we can keep them, yeah. Thank you so much.
Sure. Hi. We've talked about, obviously, revenue generation. We've talked about natural assets. We talk about bringing people on the journey. We talk about policy. But a lot of it, the conversations are very siloed. And even during London Climate Action Week, there were a number of conversations taking place at siloed levels. How are you going to, you've touched on some of them, but we also need deep system thinking to take place around this, right? To bring everything together. and we talk about TNFD, we talk about TCFD, and we talk about, there needs to be one sort of standard around, because everything has an interactive impact around this. So what do you think would be the drivers from what you can actually now start getting at the systematic level on getting the conversations going?
When you say conversations going, can you be more specific? Just because it's quite a macro question and we
Yes.
haven't got too long, so
Yes.
it would help us. Thank you.
Yeah, no, but look, they might not be an immediate answer, but it's
Yeah.
also trying to avoid that siloed kind of stream thinking, because I know each of you kind of joined the dots together, but we're still seeing a lot of like, yes, we talk about policy, we talk about revenue generation, we'll do this, but we need to kind of bring it together because everything is interconnected. So
Yeah.
how do we get that on the table?
It might be worth talking a little bit about rebuilding nature, which we're all involved in. So there's a very collaborative group that have formed under the title Rebuilding Nature, which are really trying to do that. I think I shouldn't, by the way, under my, no, I have to mention TNFD, which is also a very important policy for supporting this. But Rebuilding Nature is essentially aiming to bring together, to break down those silos and to bring together a range of stakeholders from across industries and including government to really try and shape what that future of UK biodiversity and nature should look like. Whitney, do you want to add to that in any way?
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And that is, I mean, I'll keep it brief, but what is really tricky is that at the moment we've got relatively small scale projects on the ground. We need big moves from policy and government and the top down. And so you're absolutely right. The art is how do we connect those two together? And so there are some initiatives around, but we need to just be doing a lot more of this and a lot more talking.
Thank you. And one more, should we, Asha? Yeah.
I'd love to answer that to you separately at the end as well.
It's also time.
I'll be quick. My name is Caitlin Drown. I'm from the Blakeney Group, and I focus on sustainability communications. I have heard storytelling is kind of common thread amongst the panelists. Just curious quickly, what communications or storytelling activities have really resonated with you that, you know, have been effective in resonating with audiences and making change?
Yeah, I mean, I can start with that. I think we, you know, clearly, I think solutions-led positive storytelling that isn't sort of Pollyanna, it doesn't sort of move away from really being very clear about the reality that we face, at the same time focusing on a way forward in terms of solutions that can have a real impact, which I believe, unsurprisingly, are fundamentally rooted in nature, and to then mobilize really engaging stories that include everyone behind that and empower people to see that they can have a role to play and that it's not something that's just sitting with, for example, the people here on this panel, but is accessible and inspiring and relevant to them. And then in terms of the different types of storytelling, I think, you know, film is one route. I think it depends on the audience. I think it depends on the goal. And I think it has to be multimedia. But I also think this bridging of digital to physical is really, really important because nothing moves you like experiencing it yourself. And experiencing it directly. So I think, yeah, a really great question. And I think obviously part of, hopefully the answer is that we need a lot more of the right storytelling to engage people. And there is fabulous storytelling out there and many people I'm very inspired by, many of who are here today as well. So thank you. Any quick builds as well? Yeah.
I mean, this is something which we work on quite a lot at Triodos Bank because, you know, money and investments, it all kind of feels so up here. And I think giving people really concrete actions and just making that direct link. So the campaign that ran for a number of years that wasn't ours, but that was Make My Money Matter by Richard Curtis, that was a great example of how taking something that feels really intangible, your pension and what's it invested in, and just giving those really positive examples and then that very concrete first step that people can take, because otherwise people feel powerless, and it's easy to feel powerless at the moment, right, with what's going on. So I think the more we can just really encourage people and tell them that they can make a difference and take action.
That feels like a very positive note. Any final comments? I know I'm being given the signal that we are out of time for the discussion, but we should all very much continue it. So we're just going to be moving a few steps along to the bar there. So I'm excited to, feel free to come and ask the burning questions that you didn't get a chance to ask, and just have a great conversation. And thank you so much for coming here today. And thank you so much to the panelists, and obviously the Conduit as well for hosting us here. Thank you so much.